Hi, I'm Simon Lewis, the inventor of the Lewis Pelvic Applicator, and I'm here to give you a presentation on Pelvic Binder application. And also I'd like to thank those who've educated, advised and supported me from inception to completion. And lastly, to those senior clinicians and physicians who carried out the research, provided the evidence and made the evidence so readily available. Back in 2007, I was introduced to the management of pelvic fractures in a pre-hospital environment, with both improvised and commercially available pelvic slings and binders. I understood the high energy transfers needed to fracture the pelvis and the potentially catastrophic outcome if not suspected or identified and managed as early as possible. What I didn't fully understand was the method in which the pelvic binder was applied. This was either, at the time, this was either from below the buttocks, seesawing the binder into position, or from the small of the back, seesawing the binder down. This, in my mind, and my mind only, was creating a lot of unnecessary movement to a very serious and fragile injury. I asked those around me, there must be a simpler way, causing less movement, surely. Their reply was, if there is, let me know. So almost 8 years on, I'm now letting you know. That's when it really all started. I had to go into and find the evidence through research to actually dictate the pathway and to construct the application device. And the first one, or abstract of evidence, was the Israeli Journal of Emergency Medicine. And basically the US Office of Naval Research, the US Department of Defense, funded a 3-year grant to support Legacy Biomechanics Laboratory. The grant was funded to develop a pelvic circumferential compression device, PCCD, for controlled safe stabilisation and reduction of pelvic fractures. In developing this device, Legacy set out to answer several key questions, which are in front of you on the screen. But those 5 questions I asked myself and to aid in the development of a medical device to assist in pelvic application. So, through their human cadaveric specimens were used in the Legacy study to answer the questions posed. Results from the study defined the proper force required to stabilise and reduce a pelvic ring fracture, and that was to be around 150 to 180 newtons, equivalent to 15 to 18 kilograms. Results showed that applying the sling around the hips at the level of the greater trochanter or symphysis pubis is more effective than applying it around the iliac crest or waist. Applying the sling at the correct level and the force reliably reduced open book type fractures created on the cadavers and dramatically improved mechanical stabilisation. So what I took from this was where to apply, and that's to be in a diagrammatic information form on the device, always readily available to the care provider on scene. The next evidence or piece of evidence I read and had to extract information from was the major pelvic trauma and the new guidance. And basically this was, it states, evaluate whether the patient is time critical or non-time critical, following criteria as per trauma emergency guidelines. If the patient is time critical, correct A and B problems, stabilise the pelvis on scene and rapidly transport to the nearest suitable receiving hospital. Any patient with a relevant MOI and concomitant hypertension must be managed as having a time-critical pelvic injury until proven otherwise. Reduction and stabilisation of the pelvic ring should occur as soon as practicable whilst still on scene, as stabilisation helps to reduce blood loss by realigning fracture surfaces, thereby limiting active bleeding and additionally helping to stabilise clots. Reduction of the pelvis may have a tamponade effect, particularly for venous bleeding. However, there is little evidence to support this belief. It goes on to state, log rolling of the patient with possible pelvic fracture should be avoided, as this may exacerbate any pelvic injury. Where possible, utilise an orthopaedic scoop stretcher to lift patients off the ground and limit movement to a 15-degree tilt. Effective stabilisation of the pelvic ring should be instigated at the earliest possible opportunity, preferably before moving the patient, and may be achieved by use of an appropriate pelvic splint, and secondly, application of circumferential support. However, care must be taken to ensure that overcompression does not occur. So again, this really did point out to me that as soon as practically possible and minimal movement. The next piece of evidence I chose to extract information from and utilise was the pre-hospital management of pelvic fractures, 10th of October 2006. And that again, it states early suspicion, identification and management of a pelvic fracture at the pre-hospital stage is essential to reduce the risk of death as a result of hypovolemia and to allow appropriate triage of the patient. Pelvic immobilisation should be used routinely if there is any suspicion of pelvic fracture based on the mechanism of injury, symptoms and or clinical findings. I took from this, it must be simple to use, avoiding any confusion and have high skill retention properties. Then we looked, I had to get information in my own mind for the mechanical or the biomechanical movement of the pelvis and what sort of studies had been done regarding this. So this was from the University of Rochester, May 2013. A fast-track three-dimensional electromagnetic motion analysis device was used to determine the angular motion occurring at the fracture sites. Maximum displacements for sagittal, coronal and axial rotation were recorded during the application of the binder while performing bed transfers, while log rolling and elevating the head of the bed. The T-pod device was placed as per manufacturer's recommendations. Their results were as follows. There were no significant differences in the amount of motion produced during application of the T-pod at either location. There was less motion observed in all planes of motion during all manoeuvres when the T-pod was placed at the level of the greater trochanters versus anterior iliac spine. During bed transfers, this was statistically significant in all planes. This was also significant while log rolling in the axial plane and coronal plane during head of bed elevation. So their conclusions: we advocate the placement of pelvic binder devices at the level of the greater trochanters for improved control of the fracture in an unstable pelvic injury. This may result in improved control of hemorrhage, better access to the abdomen, and greater patient comfort. So again, this was shouting out to me, we've got to have a visible feature on the medical device exactly showing the correct location of the pelvic, the greater trochanters and the line-up position for the binder prior to application. So finally, we're looking at the pre-hospital management of pelvic fractures, the initial consensus statement by the faculty, pre-hospital emergency care. I'm going to 1A, the recommendations from that statement. The primary survey should deal with external catastrophic hemorrhage, then any significant airway and or breathing issues prior to circulatory assessment. If the patient is hemodynamically compromised with a significant mechanism suggestive of a pelvic injury, a pelvic binder should be applied. Applying a pelvic binder early improves stability and allows clot formation. This may prevent ongoing hemorrhage and the often lethal trauma-induced coagulopathy. The consensus group emphasised that the pelvic binder is a treatment intervention rather than a packaging device. This should promote early application. Then it went on, recommendation 4, adequate training must be provided to avoid misplacement of devices. There is evidence that misplacement of pelvic binders can reduce the degree of fracture reduction. It is important that pre-hospital providers are trained appropriately to optimise correct placement. While there is evidence that these devices are often incorrectly placed, this was felt to be a training issue rather than an inherent design fault. Pre-hospital providers must ensure that their members' employees are appropriately trained with clinical governance structures in place to provide constructive feedback. Again, this highlighted to me that essentially to the care provider on scene, it has to be simple with that instruction. As we know, pelvic fracture is one of the rarest form of fractures we tend to witness in a pre-hospital environment. And finally, a pelvic binder should be applied prior to extrication. The faculty or the statement goes on to say, there is no evidence in literature to help guide a recommendation. If early placement controls hemorrhage and movement of an unstable fracture can disrupt clot formation, it would seem logical that placement occurs prior to extrication where possible. This area would require further investigation to find the optimal method for placement of a pelvic binder. A pragmatic approach is also required, as there are likely to be scenarios when placement is not practical prior to extrication. So again, around 53 to 60% of pelvic fractures are from MVCs or RTCs, and if we could actually apply that to stability whilst in the vehicle prior to extrication, if there is lower limb entrapment or if there's door inversion, then obviously this would aid patient outcome. So with the evidence, I had to, in my mind, design something, and I used a smart mnemonic. So firstly, it had to be suitable, the material, the length, the weight, information, etc. So the device is made from a 4.5mm polypropylene, and it's significantly less than the size of an average hand. So as much as to say, yeah, what's wrong with just folding a SAM sling, a teapot, a Prometheus sling or an improvised sling over your hand and just feeding it under the patient. Obviously, with the binder, this goes up to about 10 to 15 millimeters in depth. It's made from a polymer, which means it's a honeycomb construction. That means if it got burred or damaged through use, then it could easily be rubbed out using a hard suitable surface, brickwork, tarmac, whatever. So this burring couldn't incur any injury later on or once used for a second, third, fourth time. The surface also had to be friction efficient. So again, polypropylene is very smooth. I also had in my mind, and it should have a different sizing structure to enable effective use on all patients. So there's basically all three sizes are 180 mils wide. So that's 180 millimeters wide. The three sizes, the 550 for carrying in a backpack and using on smaller patients, let's say jockeys, horse racing jockeys, etc. We've got a 700 millimeter, which is ideal for general use, and the 880 millimeter ideal for bariatric use. This was important for obviously carrying and stowage. It should be lightweight enough as well to be carried by all personnel. The 700 millimeter complete is about 970 grams. Okay, that's without the binder, so just under 1 kilogram. And again, going back to the evidence, instructions for use and the diagrams should always be visible to the care provider to aid skill retention. And finally, on the suitability side of the smart mnemonic, the device should be simple to maintain and clean. It should be measurable. So there should be minimal effort required in preparing the device, along with conforming to current guidelines and best practice. This is regarding minimal movements, i.e. the 15-degree tilt. So when we look further on, and especially on the videos, you'll notice that we have to lift entry side of the patient 10, 15 millimeters to allow the tips of the applicator, whichever method we're using, and then we push through once we've got this initial insertion. So the device also had to be attainable with minimal confusion. So ideally to be used effectively by one person. However, obviously, as we're aware, and best practice suggests, if there are other injuries, get as many people on scene to ensure we provide appropriate care and sufficient care for the polytrauma patient. So can I use, or can we use this device effectively by use single person? Is it realistic? So when I looked at this, I had to utilise a lot of situations and scenarios, environments to make sure it worked. So it was tested on gravel, decking, block paving, obviously road service, out in Brecon, and the process should always take the same amount of time on whichever surface we are using. But at this stage, there are impediments to the application. That's pocket contents, that is obviously the material, the garment material, and the ground surface condition. Excuse me. Compatibility. there should be emphasis on how long the process takes. So minimising the time it takes to complete, and also recognising the severity of the injury and associated factors. Going back to the evidence there, it is suggestive of let's do it as soon as it's suspected or indicated on scene, and then do the pre-alert to the nearest receiving suitable hospital. We've got this down now to about 40 seconds, and that is actually sling to skin, which is quite a suitable time and can actually conform to the evidence provided earlier on. The next slide I'm going to show you is the compatibility with both commercially available slings and improvised slings, depending on which the care provider's got. Now I'll use the mouse cursor just to identify a few features on the presentation there. So it consists of two boards. So this, as it says, is a Lewis Pelvic Applicator 700, and we have an upper board and we have a lower board. All the handles have been designed for that method of use, i.e. to push or to pull. The two boards, if required, can be sandwiched together by a hook and loop fastening on the upper face of the lower board and the lower face of the upper board. As I've mentioned earlier, what was important was this greater trochanter level, and this has been the image placed on the upper board to aid the user, and indelible, almost scratch-proof blue arrows for the correct lineup and entry point. Below, and only on the lower board, I put a 100mm by 20mm aperture. This works as a line-up position. So as you can see, all surfaces are rounded for patient comfort and care provider comfort, and also to assist with infection prevention control. So any contaminant, dirt or debris can be washed and wiped clean. But looking at the aperture, we use the aperture to line up the tip of the sling. So if we look at diagram 2, once the sling with the skin surface uppermost, and it's important to remember that, once that tip is aligned with the aperture, once the upper board is placed on top, then the blue arrow will be the only visible aspect. This is important, so when the applicator is pushed under the patient, if we have a blue arrow, that means we can disconnect the hook and loop, because we know we've got the tip of the pelvic sling. We can then pull through, size the sling, take the top board out, and then apply the pelvic binder following the manufacturer's instructions and recommendations. In this slide, we can see that once the two boards are together, they're sandwiched together. This is a twofold, really, to stop any contaminant, dirt, or debris, glass, sand, gravel, etc. entering onto the sling. But it also acts as a compression device, because once it's placed under the patient, that patient weight provides adhesion with the hook and loop, but it also provides a compression factor to the sling inside, so the sling will not move, it'll be sandwiched and locked in together. So underneath we have the application methods. So we have a single board push through, a single board pull through, and a double board push through. Okay, bit of a mouthful. The single board push through, ideally, it could be utilised in the hospital environment, or when there's no contaminant around under the patient. So we're looking at, say, in a carpet, on a bed, on a mattress, but also the single board push through could be used on our larger patients, or those patients which have less clothing on. So the friction is reduced to the fabric of the sling instead of the plastic of the upper board. So let's have a look at how we prepare the single board push through. So looking at diagram 1, we're going to feed the sling through the first aperture and out through the handle and then back on itself. So in this case, the Prometheus sling will have the adhesion side of the compression device on the outside, and the black surface of the sling obviously goes to skin. And then we'll use the instructions on the upper board to guide us through and to locate the trochanters and then push underneath the patient. Obviously we haven't got a blue arrow to assist us, but we'll be able to see the tip of the lower board come through and allow us to detach the sling from the board and apply to the patient. So the next slide, we can see the single board pull through and how we attach. So the lower board, again, we're utilising that lower aperture, will be slid underneath the patient until the aperture and the handle are visible from the far side of the patient. Then we're going to feed the chosen sling or binder up through the aperture and down through the handle, almost allowing a lock-off effect. So the tab, or the extra part of the sling, should be 6 to 8 inches. So when the sling is pulled through, then it will act as a lock-off mechanism. Again, that utilised with the patient's weight will keep the sling moving forward in the direction of travel. But this method does need a second care provider or assistant just to keep the sling at the correct level as it's being pulled through. And here are some diagrams just to explain it again. So we have a single board pull through method. So we've lined up utilising the upper board instructions with the greater trochanters, and we're going to push underneath the patient. So we've got both the aperture and the handle visible. Then with our chosen sling, we're going to come up through the lower aperture, down through the handle, and pull through underneath the patient on that level of the greater trochanters, and then disconnect from the board. If we need to, we're going to expose to skin using the V-cut method, which is on the videos via the link at the end, and then apply the sling in the appropriate manner. So the message, the device, or hopefully tonight, the messages I've given you are: it's simple to use, it's effective, and it's time minimising, based on its function, but more importantly, the evidence provided by the senior clinicians and physicians. It's also got high skill retention properties. We know that pelvic trauma is rare, and I'd like to think that the device does exactly what it says on the tin. So that basically leaves me to say again, thanks for all the people who've helped me out, supported me and advised me throughout the course, and again, without them or without each other, I don't think we'll ever achieve what we set out to achieve. So thank you very much indeed. If you need any further information, there are links. Please click on the links, and we've got videos regarding application methods in different scenarios. And if you want to contact me, my email address is at the bottom. Excuse me. So again, thank you very much for your time, and I think it's now question time, and I look forward to answering, hopefully, any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. I've just got Andy Thomas online as well. Are you there, Andy?
Hiya, yeah, Andy, I'm here.
Yeah, I think we have got a few questions, Simon, and so I'll let Andy read the questions out to you, and I'll just engage with some of the questions that's come by chat.
Okay. Okay,
Okay,
thanks.
Simon. The first question we have up there, I'll read it out word for word, and then you can come up with an answer. And if you need any clinical support with it, I can chip in. If the pelvic binder is a treatment device and not a packaging device, in a hemodynamically stable patient, is there a time limit for its application? Thinking that if clotting has occurred, is there any further benefit? Did you get that, Simon?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's down to the care provider and the scope of practice, isn't it? So if there is a hemodynamically compromised patient, yeah, on a stable fracture, what sort of damage or further injury I can't see, and you'll be able to back me up here, Andy, what further injury or damage the sling or binder would cause. So
Yeah.
my answer, sorry.
Yeah, no, Simon. I think yeah, you've got on there. I think clinically speaking, I think what's important to answer here is, I think what the individual's getting at is, obviously often with the application of a pelvic binder in today's clinical environment is as part of the catastrophic hemorrhage control, because you can bleed out from your pelvis very quickly, and then he says, so if for whatever reason or when you get there this hasn't happened, is there a time limit on using the device to put a pelvic binder on? Well, I would say no, there's not, because there's no time limit on putting a pelvic binder on. The earlier the better. However, if the patient's clot is already formed, what we must remember is that we've used 90% of the clotting factors to get that first clot in the body, and should a clot then break, it's very difficult for the body to clot again. So even at that stage, it would be very worth to apply the binder with the LPA to ensure that any further movements, we don't break that clot and therefore cause harm to the patient by accident.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Right, I'm just going down now. There's a few coming on. I've got another one here, Simon, which is definitely your area. Obviously, as the inventor of the device, with a single board pull through, does the Velcro not catch clothing or scratch the patient's skin?
No, not at all. On the design feature, the softer part, i.e. the loop of the hook and loop, is always on the lower board. So it's a very soft application, and there's no abrasion to the skin surface at all. So that's the answer to that question.
Excellent. Is there a weight size limit on the device's use?
Yeah, I did some sort of biomechanical trial on this on weight, but what we've got to realise is the deflection. So I must emphasise that it's not actually a lifting device, but it can be utilised for moving. It has been tested, a 700 has been tested to 140 kilograms. But what we've got to realise is that obviously the deflection, if we are utilising this to lift a patient, let's say a bariatric patient, to ramp position, because it's ideal for that as well, that as long as it's a moving and not a continual lifting and moving device. So we're not going to use this to stretcher people or to lift people up and move them to another location.
Excellent. I've got the questions keep coming, so I'll keep asking them. Any advantage to applying lubricating gel, etc., to the applicator for initial insertion with pull-through method?
There could be on the skin on the initial application, but it all depends on the patient's clothing. And as you'll see in the videos, the initial insertion point, once we've lifted that patient 10-15 millimeters, and then it is a continual, almost robust push through. So this all depends on that impediment, whether it be what the patient's actually wearing. If the patient was naked, then yes, the lubricant on the upper face of that board would be essential, absolutely essential. Yeah.
Okay, another question, and I think it's what came behind the idea. So I've got here, as a fireman, what inspired you to try and improve patient care by inventing this device?
Well, just the amount of road traffic collisions. I've been fortunate, 23 years in the fire service, to work with some great paramedics and doctors out there. And when the concern is something which is involving the fire service, as in extrication, access, and space creation, well, if someone's really trapped inside a vehicle and the main cause or the most serious injury is something we can do inside the vehicle, then that really spurred it on. But I also did have a personal situation. So, yeah, I just think that if we can make life easier for ourselves and address those, I don't really want to go into too much depth, but the fine and the gross motor skills, as we know, most when we're under pressure, that these can be affected and deteriorate rapidly.
Okay, the questions keep coming, Simon, so take a sip of water and prepare yourself for more answers. The next one is a simple question. Is it suitable for infants? Is the question.
Well, don't forget that this isn't a pelvic applicator, so I would always enforce and recommend that the actual binder of choice, you will follow that manufacturer's recommendation. So that's simple. This is the application device. So the answer to that question is, just always follow the manufacturer's recommendation.
Okay, thank you. The next question. This sounds like a technical question. You mentioned that it should be tensioned to between 15 and 18 kilograms. How do you know when the correct amount of force has been applied?
Okay, that's going back to the evidence at the start. They use the SAM sling, which incorporates the patented auto-stop buckle. So that pelvic circumferential compression device for that study used the auto-stop buckle, and that works. That cam and spring works on the 15 to 18 kilogram of pressure, and then locked off via the Velcro, hook and loop.
Right, so that's specific to one of the devices, one of the pelvic devices that can be used, not specific to your product. Yeah, I understand that, and I'm sure that's made clear to the person that's asked the question. Okay. Next question. The next question may be cut off, so I'm going to read half a question out. I don't think you'll be able to answer it, and if the person who asked that question wants to resend the question, that might be helpful, because I think some of it's clipped off for whatever reason. Given I haven't checked the links given in sitting patients, then it goes blank. So there may be something else in that question, so I'll move on. And if you've asked that question, please re-text that into us, and I'll get that question out to Simon.
Okay.
The next one is a chap's just put, looks like a good device for offshore use, and it actually does look, I think that's a reasonable statement. Would you add anything to that, Simon?
Yes, I would, because I've had feedback from those people who bought into the, let's say, concept of the applicator, and when we're in a confined space or we're in a remote area, to have that device there and to be fully competent and confident with its use, it almost just ticks a lot of boxes in your mind. So I'm having feedback, we are having feedback saying now it would be very hard to go back to another method once people have used the applicator. But it is a hands-on product. Once you've got to literally play with it, you've got to get to know it, and it's a very simple device.
Right, that's excellent. Thank you. I've gotten the second half of the question, so I'm just going to split it between the two. So, given I haven't checked the links given in sitting patients, have you found any difficulties in application in reticular difficult? I assume, sorry, it might be a typo here, and apologies if it difficult to get to areas. So I'm assuming the question's specific to different types of car seats, or if you physically can't get close to the patient. What are your thoughts there, Simon?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, actually. Well, there are impediments, and let me start by being brutally honest that the the applicator will be compromised by bucket seats, which don't actually recline. It'll be compromised by centre consoles in vehicles, so we can't get access to the far side, i.e. the blue arrow side of the applicator, and if we did try and do that, we could incur a tilt on the patient, an aggressive tilt on the patient. So that's the first part of that question. The second part is, this is about weight displacement as well. If we are working in a vehicle, we need to get the patient as supine or laid back as soon as possible to accommodate the application. This works twofold. We don't want to be bumping and bashing off clots later on in the extrication, but also, if you can imagine being sat upright, all that weight is literally on your hips, whereas if we lay the patient out slightly, then that weight, or the patient weight, is then displaced over a bigger area. I hope that answers that question.
No, that's great. A couple of more quick questions, unless any more come in. One of the last two. In your experience, Simon, does using the LPA device reduce movement of the patient's pelvis when applying a pelvic binder?
Yeah. Yes, in my experience, it does. I've even gone to the extreme of placing a bowl of water on the volunteer. It was explained to me in the early days by a senior doctor that we look at the clotting effect as almost a bowl of jelly, and yeah, it minimises movement no end. But we must bear in mind that, like anything, there is another method, which, if for whatever reason that the application or use of the applicator is compromised, then we'll always go to or utilise another method.
Excellent. And the final question I've got on here is it a one-use only device, or is it reusable?
It's totally reusable. It is wipe clean, and the only thing it doesn't like is temperatures over about 104 degrees, but polymers don't like that. So it's totally wipe clean and wash clean, and that's why I've tried to incorporate all the rounded edges, surfaces, and all the radials, so we can get in there and give it a good clean. It was taken out to Afghanistan and used out there, and the feedback from there was that it's obviously white, so it doesn't like, or a polymer as well, being its honeycomb construction, doesn't really like exposure to heat and sunlight, but it would always be packed in a bag anyway. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, no, I know we've had some freaky weather in the UK at the moment, but 104 degrees is not something I think we should expect anytime in the UK, so that should be fine.
Exactly.
So just hang on the line a second for me, Simon. I'm just going to hand over back to Andy Ormerod, as that's all the questions finished, and thanks for answering those.
Yeah, thanks so indeed.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. One of the other questions just come through by email. Rod, thank you. I've just answered that question back to you. It was literally just a comment in relation to the cut-off question, and it was saying that I work offshore in the industry, and this will be a great adjunct to having the medical centre, which I think you've already agreed that to. It certainly would, and I think you said you had some feedback.
Yes. Well, the feedback, both in hospital and pre-hospital, has been, as long as people accept that there are different application methods and associated benefits. So again, if we were in a medical centre and the patient comes into the medical centre, we could use either the single board push through or the single board pull through. It's there, but ideally it's that we can do this. We can do this, and we can achieve all the objectives, and hopefully, the majority of objectives set out in the recommendations and the research-based evidence. So, yeah.
Perfect. There is just one question. I've just literally come back in the bottom there. That was super fast, Mark. I have to say you got that in at the last minute. Just out of interest, Simon, did you demonstrate this product during a College of Paramedics CPD event at Ambulance Expo at Moreton on the Marsh Training College?
I did. We utilised West Midlands Fire Service, their education team, and we had volunteers from, I think it was 3 or 4 ambulance service on the Royal Air Force, and yeah, we did down at the Fire Service College. Yeah, I can remember that vivid. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, Simon, thank you very much indeed for spending some time tonight. If we do have any more questions, you can fire them in to either Simon via email or via myself at CPDME, and I will forward them on to Simon personally. For those who have been with us for the duration of the webinar, you will get a copy of a certificate, attendance certificate, and also a recording of the presentation that will drop automatically nicely into your CPDME profile if you're with us. If not, you will get it by email, so you can download that and do with it as you wish. Just to let you know about some up-and-coming webinars which are coming shortly. We have one on the 24th of February, Identification and Management of Frequent Service Users within a Pre-Hospital Setting. I'm sure we're all familiar with that concept. Another one we have is She's Airing the Chest, which is being done by Andy Thomas, who's online with us tonight. And what are the options and treatment evaluations? And then for those people who fear the word fitness to practice, we have got a gentleman called Oliver Munday on the March the 16th who's going to talk about fitness to practice and what you need to do to protect yourself as a practitioner. And again, if you want to jump on some more webinars, because we've got 1 or 2 others which I haven't mentioned, you can do that by registering free of charge at cpdb.com/webinar, where you'll find lots and lots of other interesting topics coming up shortly. And again, they're absolutely free of charge for you to join. So all that leaves me to say is thank you very much to Simon Lewis.
Thank you very much indeed. Take care.
And thank you very much indeed to Andy Thomas for joining in and answering some of the questions for us. Thanks very much, Andy.
No worries, mate.
So just to cap, you will get your certificate and you will get recording within 24 hours. All that leaves me to say is thank you very much for joining us this evening and have a good night. Thank you and good night.